encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Hello and welcome to Preachers in Training. This is the podcast where we talk about all things preaching and ministry. My name is Robert Hatfield, and glad to have you with us today. We're coming to you from the exhibit hall floor at the Freed-Hardeman University 89th Annual Bible Lectureship. And this just gives us a good opportunity to sit down with some folks, and today we get to sit down with Lonnie Jones, the Lonnie Jones. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm well. You came on this podcast years ago. I had to look it up. The first time you were on in 2014, which was like 11 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And then you were on in 2017.
Okay.
And so anyway, you're always a blessing. We appreciate you.
Well, man, I appreciate what you do.
In the time since then, you've gotten into the podcasting space yourself.
Yeah, I do a little thing. It's
Tell us about it.
I tell stories.
Yeah.
And the stories are random. They may be about being a grandfather or working with a SWAT team. And
okay.
We take those stories and then we look at the facts.
Okay.
The facts lead to concepts, and then the concepts lead to applications. And
okay.
So, an example, I tell about my brother's neurotic cat. He inherited a cat when he got married. And apparently the cat, had been abused somewhat by his wife's brothers.
Oh.
And so I go to visit them. They're not home. I walk in the house. I sound like my brother.
Uh-huh.
I look like my brother. Neurotic cat comes out thinking I'm my brother. But when it gets into my scent cone, I don't smell like my brother. It goes crazy. And I had to roll up a newspaper and go Jason Bourne with it.
What in the world?
Okay. So then you take that discussion and it's like, so what happens when you end up this close to somebody and you realize they're not who you think they are? And so we talk about relationships, relationship difficulties, toxic personalities. It's stuff like that. It takes a weird twist all the time.
Does that stuff just roll off the dome for you? I mean, is that just a natural thing?
Yeah, it's just the way my weird mind works. I've had too much head trauma. I've had that bell rung. I've been put to sleep too many times. It's just one of those things.
All right. Well, speaking of trauma and all that kind of stuff, you do a lot with the SWAT team, don't you, in Huntsville, Alabama?
I'm an embedded chaplain.
Embedded. What does embedded chaplain mean?
So we got, 15 guys that are chaplains. It's a volunteer thing. And
okay.
We take turns being on call.
Yeah.
We ride with the city. We'll go ride patrol. If somebody has a death notification, whoever's on call handles it. Years and years ago, they asked me to be attached to the team and carry a pager. And when SWAT goes, my pager goes off too. So when the phone goes, you get a message that says report to this. Okay. And it could be that we're going to go kick in a door for a drug unit. We may go serve a warrant with the federal marshals, or there may be a guy holding somebody hostage. Yeah. And I show up. I'm not a shooter. Yeah. I'm not an operator. Right. I'm just there. Okay. We call it in chaplaincy the ministry of presence. I have a Ninja Turtle vest with no ammo on it, so you'll see this guy hanging off the back of an armored vehicle. Okay. Hey, why doesn't that guy have any weapons? Well, they won't let me have any weapons. And I'm just there. Cool. So I train with them every week. I go spend a training day, and then I've got some interesting experiences. So they let me teach rappelling. I'm their bad guy. So when they clear buildings, I hide. So now I've been hiding from them for 33 years. So I can teach you how to get killed in a building. I don't necessarily can't teach you how to clear one, but the danger areas, in a room, I can go here, here's your angles. Yeah. And it's kind of turned into, I'm a subject matter expert from the other side. And then I get to do some of that. And then I'm trained as a negotiator and teach de-escalation stuff for the department. So it's morphed into, I'm a chaplain with a lot of other opportunities to connect. Yeah. But I'm not law enforcement. I'm just attached to this team.
And then in addition to that, you're a licensed counselor?
Yes, I'm in private practice as a therapist. 26 years this spring.
And youth ministry extraordinaire.
I had a long run with youth ministry. I got the opportunity to work with John Rice, the guy who started Backwoods Christian Camp. Cool. The spring of 1980. And then, of course, I worked with him my junior year, my senior year of high school that summer. Then I went to Harding.
Yeah.
And then up until I went into private practice, I really hadn't done anything other than youth ministry. I had a small stint as a pulpit preacher in Salem, Arkansas.
Okay, yeah. And you lay your hat right now with the congregation in Meridianville, Alabama.
Yes.
When you're around. That's good. Well, awesome. Well, we appreciate your time today and all that you do. I know a lot of people on the Preachers in Training audience will be familiar with you, and they've heard you speak at CYC and everywhere else. And so anyway, we just appreciate what you do.
Well, thanks for the invitation to be here and talk with you a little bit.
We're talking today about mental health and ministry. And, of course, everybody's talking about mental health these days. And you've been talking about mental health for a long time, but it's really come to the public for, what, recent decade or so? I mean,
probably the last 10 years.
Yeah. As ministers, we often, and I think maybe this is what you came on to talk about before, how do we know our limits? And it's important that we know, what we may do in offering biblical counsel or advice, and where that needs to stop, and we need to bring in a trained professional, somebody who has the credentials and is able to help somebody. But today's focus is really more on keeping in check with ourselves. How can we as ministers ensure that we are mentally healthy,
all right.
Emotionally stable? Is that a good way to say it? I mean, we come in with a lot. I've seen this graphic online, and it's got this figure of a human, and it's a black and white drawing, okay? And so here's this person, and the whole body is just white. But then someone comes along, and they're troubled with something in life, and their body is gray. And they relay that to this person who is all in white, and now this person who's all in white is a little off-white. And, of course, as that goes on, the more people interact with that person who once was all white, now they become all gray, if not darker gray toward black. And the point there is we do bear the burdens of other people, and that can be a difficult thing, especially as ministers who may encounter a variety of these within a week's time. How do we navigate all this kind of stuff?
So the first thing I would say is a minister needs to do a look into whether or not he is emotionally intelligent or not.
Okay.
That's a popular theory. The guy who writes about it the best is named Daniel Goleman. He's not a creationist, so you'll have to filter when he says evolved, he means designed. He just doesn't know it yet. But he talks about that's a predictor for success. And emotional intelligence is how well do I understand my own emotions? Do I understand, these are my words, not his, that my emotions are information, not instruction? And then once I understand my emotions, can I do self-regulation? And self-regulation is delayed gratification, impulse control, and motivation. Can I marshal my emotions and help me self-soothe? Can I get over anxiety, the consequences of failure, those kind of things?
Man.
And then it's the ability to choose between what you want now and what you want most.
Okay.
So the long-term stuff. Now, if I can do that with me, there's a high chance I can recognize that in you. And I can pick up on subtle clues on what it means about you when you're distressed or depressed or whatever. And then that allows me to manage relationships.
Yeah.
Now, understanding that keeps you from having a lot of cognitive distortions. So if you do a deep dive into cognitive behavioral therapy, the cognitive distortions are the things where we take an event and we apply a meaning to that. If that meaning is invalid, my emotions create destruction, dysfunction, and distress. If my meanings are healthy, then my emotions lead me to balance and harmony.
What's an example of an event like that?
Let's suppose that somebody at the congregation blames you because their kid left the church.
Okay.
All right. Well, this must mean I'm a failure. I didn't minister to this kid. I didn't pay him enough attention. I didn't do whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So this means I'm responsible for this person's choices. Okay. So, well, if I'm responsible for their choices, where would they be? Well, they'd be in church if I were in charge.
Yeah.
And so, it's the idea of if I could make you mad, I could make you happy.
Yeah.
If I could make you cheat, I could make you faithful. If I could make you drink, I could make you sober. So a cognitive distortion is trying to be responsible for things you don't control.
Okay.
So, at some point there's a healthy thing that says, I want to be compassionate. I want to be sympathetic. I want to be present. I want to be empowering. But at the end of the day, it's not really my problem.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the hardest lessons for me early on in ministry. I finally had to come to the realization, and I'm hard-headed, so it took a long time. I can't make anyone do anything.
That's right.
And I can't really even explain why they did what they did.
Right. And they can't either.
Yes.
Because once you get into the emotional brain and you don't have emotional intelligence, you end up doing things either based on implicit beliefs or on autopilot. You know, I behaved the way I behaved because it worked for me sometime. And that's the difference between mental illness and maladaptive behavior. Maladaptive behavior is something that I can do, but I may do it non-consciously, not subconsciously, but non-consciously. But the only reason I do it is because it's linked to survival. Okay. Well, does it work? Well, I'm still here.
Right. Yeah.
It still works. And an example I use of that is I've always been a climber, played on ropes, rappel, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I've got this rule. I don't remember writing it down. I don't remember wanting a tattoo or anything, but it says, in order to survive, you don't let go of the rope.
Okay.
Swinging on a rope, climbing a rope, rappelling. Even if you take a fall climbing, you grab the rope and take the ride down.
Yeah.
So there's this rule in my life. If you get out of control, hang on to the rope.
Yeah.
Well, now put me in the boat behind in the river and drag me across the surface on water skis.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when you fall on water skis? Okay, most people do what? But I've got this rule.
Yeah.
I've got this behavior that for 20-something years kept me alive. And now I'm in the river and I'm falling on water skis.
Yeah.
So without thinking about it, I just don't let go of the rope. And the very same thing that kept me alive is now drowning me, dragging me under.
I see.
And so the things that work get repeated, the things that get repeated get ingrained, and then we don't know why we do them. They're just part of
what we do.
Our implicit beliefs.
And some of that can even come from family dynamics growing up and blah, 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 right? I mean, kind of inherit that stuff.
Responsible for dad's temper, responsible for dad's drinking.
Yeah.
Be careful, mom will, get a nervous breakdown,
right.
those kind of things.
Right.
And so, and until we deep dive into, hey, how does this work for me? I don't know that it really may not work.
Yeah.
And so ministers need to understand, several cognitive distortions and understanding those rules. And those rules make us who we are.
Yeah.
But they can be weaponized against us. They don't mean we're bad people. They don't mean we're dysfunctional. It's just there's a character about me that can be weaponized if I'm not careful.
Wow. Boy, we want to talk about, okay, somebody became unfaithful and I feel personally responsible, or at least maybe we could say I have a really strong vested interest in this person.
All right.
Okay, or the elders made a decision that I strongly disagree with, and maybe it's not a doctrinal thing, it's just they made a judgment call and I didn't think it was the right judgment call, and now I'm bearing that, or I feel like they're disqualified, or whatever. I mean, just something like that. Or maybe I make a move in ministry from this congregation to that congregation, and I realize, boy, looking back, I've had these habits, I've had these views about elders because my elders at X church treated me this way, and now I'm in let's just say a healthier environment, and I can see that now with clearer eyes. All that stuff happens in ministry all the time, and sometimes it's coming to us. There's so much going on at any one time, plus the stress of I need to teach class or preach a sermon this week, and I want to do that right, and so there's some stress with me there. Emotional intelligence can be difficult to it.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
Now, you take all the things of emotional intelligence, and it boils down to Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
So if I can put myself in your position and have, the fancy term is mirror neurons.
Whoa.
If I can mirror what's going on in your life,
okay,
and instead of our interaction looking like this, it looks like this.
Okay.
I try to see this from the elder's perspective.
Yes.
I try to see this from my spouse's perspective. I try to even see when this person left the church. Well, not my fault, but now I understand that you were hurt, you were disappointed, whatever.
So are you saying that compassion or walking beside someone is a way of even helping our own inner peace?
Right,
is that what you're saying?
Because once I understand, their rules of engagement are this, it had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Why do elders treat ministers the way they do? Well, because they've had other ministers they didn't trust.
Right.
They had other ministers that didn't do their job.
Yeah.
And so your brain is a specialist in generalization. That which is similar will be treated the same. In trauma, if I get stung by a hornet, I'll dodge a housefly. If I'm scared of snakes, I'll chop up a garden hose.
Yes.
And so, when it comes to an eldership, that word eldership is connected to a neural cluster. And every eldership you've ever been involved with, but the most prominent one won't be the good one, it'll be the bad one. Because good ones don't create trauma, bad ones do.
Okay.
And so now I'm going to meet the elders. Well, your survival brain goes, oh, that didn't end well.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. That wasn't pleasant.
Right.
They didn't give me a raise. They asked me to move. I'm going to go meet with these elders. What can happen?
Yeah.
Well, learning how to self-soothe and make a distinction between this eldership's not that eldership. And then also just understanding, why do elderships behave the way they behave? Well, look at what they do for a living.
Yeah.
You know, those kind of things.
Right.
And then if you take an imperfect person and you let him be an elder, what have you created?
An imperfect elder.
Yes, he can be taught.
Thank you.
And so I've got a congregation full of imperfect people.
Yeah.
I'm an imperfect guy. I'm married to an imperfect woman. I've got an imperfect marriage.
Yeah.
And so learning that you don't have to have everything in order. God uses imperfect things to do good things. God uses broken vessels.
Yeah.
And a lot of times ministers have the idea that I've got to put this front on and I've got to act in a way that's not true.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it definitely does. There's a balance there again, too, right? I mean, there's caveats with every one of these statements,
absolutely,
right? But,
absolutely.
Yeah, we want to put the best foot forward for the congregation. We don't want people to feel like they can't have confidence in their elders if there's something major going on. It's a different story. But anyway, you know what I mean? So sometimes we feel like we have to protect weaker Christians from, like, let's say the inner turmoils that may be happening in the congregation, leadership or otherwise. I don't know. It's a hard thing to do.
I think being honest,
Yeah.
that there are
Imperfect
difficulties,
people around us. Yeah.
but we are navigating the difficulties.
There you go.
But one of the cognitive distortions is the all or nothing thinking. If I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. If I didn't do it all, I didn't do any.
Yeah.
If everybody doesn't like it, nobody likes it. And so that's second cognitive distortion. Other than trying to be responsible for things we can't control,
Right.
we have a very narrow gap between ideal and unacceptable. Instead of it being broad, it becomes, Paul says a wife should not depart from her husband. That's ideal.
Yes.
But if she departs, that's in the middle. Let her remain unmarried to be reconciled.
Yeah.
If you get married again and you don't reconcile, that may end up into unacceptable.
Right.
But as long as you remain unmarried, she can depart. But we look at it as, if you left your husband for any reason, God hates divorce, you're sinning.
Yeah.
Well, we parse a lot of things that we believe that way.
Yeah. We get in a lot of trouble by overgeneralizing that.
Yes, sir.
And even harm our own mental health in the process.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we start thinking in terms of that one person didn't like my lesson, it must be bad.
Yeah.
Well, the people who like your lessons don't have the energy to tell you. They're trying to go eat at the Golden Corral. Right?
Right, yes.
And I don't want, this is terrible, but you speak in a room full of 1,000 people.
Yeah.
The 4 people who have time to come and talk to you about a deep personal issue are not the healthy people in the room.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Because everybody else just wants to go to the next thing.
Yeah, it's
Right.
They got things to do. Okay. Okay. At the top, if I can circle back around to something, you were mentioning that author, and maybe it was something that he said, or maybe it was your own summarization, but it was something like you said, I need to remember that emotions are, and I think you said something like instructional, not instructive.
Okay.
Did
They're
you say
informational.
that? Informational.
They're
Yes.
information, not instruction.
Not instruction. Yes.
So my emotions tell me something.
Yeah.
They don't tell me to do anything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's a green light. Sometimes that's a red light. Sometimes that's a yellow light.
Yeah.
I'm just getting information. And so anger management is not being angry. Anger management is managing how I respond to anger.
Oh, okay.
Anxiety is not, you teach some little kid that, hey, you got an anxiety disorder, we're going to keep you from being nervous. That's not going to happen. He's wired to be nervous. Okay, how do I respond to being nervous? Am I going to let that control me, or am I going to control my response to it? Well, that's the same thing with depression. That's the same thing with anxiety. That's the same thing with guilt. That's the same thing with being despondent. That's the same thing with being discouraged. All those things are, I'm going to feel these things, number one, because I'm imperfect and I work with imperfect people.
Yeah.
And they generate those emotions in me. Am I going to let those control me, or am I going to control the way I respond to them?
Yeah. How does this impact even like something like burnout?
Well, burnout happens when there's all or nothing thinking.
Okay.
I've always been miserable and I'll never get better. What's the truth of that?
Yeah.
Are there good days in ministry? Are there bad days in ministry? You take the thing that John Gottman does, look at your ministry, look at the story of your ministry, celebrations versus regrets, satisfaction versus disappointment, harmony versus chaos, us the congregation versus selfishness. And if you start looking at a guy who's burned out, the other side of that thing is going to be overbalanced, and it's called negative sentiment override. I only see the bad. I can't remember the good.
Yeah. Well, bad news spreads quicker than good news does, and it hangs around longer, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Wow. All right. This is great. A lot of us, I think, don't have that emotional intelligence that you're talking about. I mean, is that a reflective thing? When we get down to brass tacks, I mean, how do I keep my finger on the thumb of this throughout a given week? Or let's say, like, I'm having a rough ministry season. Like, it's not just this day. Maybe it's this week, or maybe there have been 10 deaths in the last month at the congregation where I am, and I just feel like all I'm doing is preaching funerals all the time. I mean, how do I keep a good check on my emotional state?
So I start with, it's a little chart I use called the event, meaning, emotion paradigm.
Wow.
So here's your event.
I feel like there ought to be a TM at the end of that or something.
Maybe no. So there's an event, and for every event, you have an emotional byproduct.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter. When you have events, you have emotions. If the emotions lead to balance and harmony, you're probably managing your emotions well.
Okay.
A loved one dies, you go through a period of grief, it creates a little depression. At some point, you'll go through that path, and as time goes on, you'll navigate that. It won't completely heal, but it'll heal where it's manageable.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Here's an event, it produces the emotions, and the emotions are producing distress, destruction, or dysfunction. Okay, I'm not managing my emotions right. Nothing wrong with the emotions, but the management of the emotions, so where does that come from? Well, the event gets run through a filter of perception, implicit beliefs, implicit ideas, my rules of engagement, my family of origin, and those perceptions create meanings. This happened, what does it mean to you, and what does it mean about you? And to the degree that that is valid, you process your emotions. I've done 7 funerals this week. I don't like my job. Okay? All right? So, do you like funerals? No. Do you like watching people hurt? No. Do you like burying friends? No. Is it okay to not like doing funerals and not like that part of your job? Yeah.
Right.
That's probably nothing wrong with that other than this is unpleasant.
Yeah.
Versus, all I do is bury the dead, and I'm a dead preacher, and I'm a dead church, and the church is dead and dying. You see how that changes things just a little bit? You know, Joseph's brothers show their father a coat dipped in blood. He says, this means my son is dead. He's torn by an animal. I'll never be happy again. Is that what that means?
No.
But how many times do we apply meanings to things and those meanings aren't valid?
Yeah, that's a good point. The hardest part of that is gauging the time frame, right? I mean, like, how do I know when I've been in this for too long? Or
you mean
at an unhealthy state?
You mean the state of thinking or the ministry?
State of thinking.
Okay, all right.
Although that could lead to ministry. Okay. I mean, how do I know you spoke just this morning as we're recording this on grief, and my wife was in it. I wasn't able to be in it, but she talked about how you talked about balancing this like a 4-legged stool. You're going to be living with this, and to your point, you just said, like, I've got to figure out how to go on with this in a sense. I mean, this is probably the wrong way to say it. You can correct me in a minute. But how do I know when it's like, well, I've been in this phase of this event for too long now?
Well, I think you talk about dose toxicity.
Yes, that's what I was going to know. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
So I've got this thing, and it's toxic at a certain level, but how much of it before it's actually toxic?
Ben Hayes is making faces at you.
Ben Hayes is about to be put to sleep.
Dose toxic. So how do I know when it's too long and it's toxic?
So then you start asking myself, am I having an aberrant reaction that is outside the norm? Am I always depressed? Am I always angry? Is it hurting me physically, emotionally, intellectually, or spiritually?
Okay.
If I'm being damaged in one of those areas and the damage feels chronic and irreparable, it may be a sign to get out. And I'm more worried about ministers with chronic events than I am acute events.
I see.
So, I teach stress management at the police academy. The police officers have this level of stress that nobody else knows about.
Sure.
I'm not talking about being in a car wreck or a car chase or a gun battle. Every day that kid gets up, he puts on a body armor vest. I get ready for work, I find my cell phone.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know, am I taking the laptop to the office or the cell phone to the office? Okay, I'm taking the laptop.
Yeah.
That's me getting, these officers put on a vest.
Right.
Well, there's in the back of your mind, why are you putting on a body armor vest?
Right.
Hey, somebody may try to kill me today. And then in addition to the vest, he puts on a belt. And I can restrain you, incapacitate you, or kill you with the things on that vest. And then when they're not cops and they go to church, what do they carry to church with them? An off-duty weapon.
Yeah.
And they take their family to a restaurant, what do they carry with them? A weapon. So you've got this amount of stress that's always on you.
Yeah.
So if I ask you to hold your cell phone at arm's length, your cell phone's not very heavy, but holding it out here for 5 minutes, it becomes unmanageable. And then anything you put on the end of that lever, catastrophic system failure. So if I'm under enough chronic stress that every precipitating event creates a blow up, I'm probably in an unhealthy, unmanageable situation.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yes, it does. And on this podcast, the listeners, the number one thing that we hear from listeners is talk about time management. Talk about time management. I feel like I can't get it all done.
So let's do the Eisenhower box.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that little?
I've
little
heard
guy?
of it. Yeah.
So the first time I saw it was it was in a semantic map that was done by
The Jenkins brothers
Stephen
are now
Collett,
here to
Stephen Covey, yeah.
to mess with us here.
Dale has been put to sleep.
He has been put to sleep.
I didn't get your message. All right.
Okay, Eisenhower box.
So
okay.
you at the 12 o'clock position
Yeah.
are things that are important. At the 6 o'clock position are things that are not important.
Oh yeah, okay.
9 o'clock is urgent. 3 o'clock is not urgent. So you make this grid.
Yeah.
Important and urgent. Important but not urgent. Urgent but not important. Not important, not urgent. How do you know the difference? Well, without going into the long story of how I figured this out,
Okay.
things that are urgent and important have immediate consequences.
Okay.
So I'm a minister. It's Monday. Time, money, and energy. What do I do today that has immediate consequences?
Right.
Well, crisis comes first. You know, that person who's had a death in the family, the person who's suicidal,
Yeah.
the person who's despondent, that's immediate. I don't do something about it. There's gonna be something happening. Maybe sermon prep,
Yeah.
those kind of things.
Right.
And so,
It's not Friday or Saturday yet,
Right.
so sermon is way off in the distance at this point.
But see, that's, and the longer you push that away,
Right. Yes.
so you got to say, this has immediate consequences. If I don't study today,
Yeah.
and anything else happens this week to disrupt my schedule, I'm behind the curve. So you
Right.
give the lion's share. What do they pay you to do if you're a pulpit minister? Oh, you preach.
Yes.
So that should get
Well,
a lot of your attention.
there's some ambiguity in the job description, but anyway, yeah.
Well, and understanding with your elders, did you hire me to preach or minister?
Good point. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
everything you say yes to
Right.
is something else you say no to.
Yeah.
There's a little book I wrote called Grappling with Life. I wrote it for the jiu-jitsu cage fighter guys. But it has 10 principles that involve Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And if you get on top of me and are trying to hold me down, and I can,
Which I would never do.
well, but you could because you're younger than me.
No.
But if I create a situation where I'm trying to free this hand and you staple it to the ground because you're leaning to your left, your right side's going to be light.
Oh, yeah.
And I can lift you. Everything you say yes to is something that you say no to. So you got to decide, you know. So immediate consequences are urgent and important.
Okay.
Things that are important but not urgent have delayed consequences. You're going to pay the piper on this. Sermon prep.
Yeah, yeah.
Writing out an idea for sermons, take a retreat and plan your sermons for a year.
Right.
Physical fitness, paying your income taxes, paying into Social Security.
Right.
All those things. You don't have to do it right now. Nobody's going to check on you.
Yeah.
But in the future, these things are going to show up.
Right.
That's time with your family. That's time with your children. They're important, but they're not urgent because nobody's checking on you.
Yeah.
Then you have things that are urgent but not important. Let's write another flipping bulletin.
I'm so glad you said that.
Let's make a radio ad.
Yeah.
Let's and we're like, hey, let's change the letters on the church sign.
Whoa.
The only reason that guy's in charge of the church sign is he's not stable enough to work in the sound room, okay? That's where you get those guys. Have you read that stuff on the highway that these guys? But when that guy doesn't do the job, guess who has to do it?
Right.
The minister or the youth minister. And so it looks like it's important. It's urgent. but it's not important. And then you have some things that are not urgent, not important. They have zero consequences. So I get up on a Monday, time, money, and energy.
Yeah.
Immediate, delayed, perceived, none. 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years. If it's not going to have a result, I'm not going to worry about it.
That's great. Yeah.
Now, if you take the theory of emotional intelligence, different theory, but
Sure.
okay, delayed gratification, impulse control, self-regulation, and motivation. Those people put more emphasis on the things that have perceived consequences than the things that have delayed consequences.
Okay.
Because they can't delay gratification, they can't deal with the impulse control. They're looking at, these are urgent, but they're not important.
Right.
Those people are always in distress. And that typically defines all mentally ill people, and all people with substance abuse issues, and all people who are maladaptive. Because instead of putting their energy into things that have long-term consequences, they ignore the long-term consequences and do the immediate thing. It feels urgent, but it's not important.
Right.
And the people who are dysfunctional, and a problem is a lack of resources. A dysfunction is a misuse of resources.
Okay.
One is I don't have them.
Yeah.
The other, I got them, I don't use them. Time, money, energy, there's your resources.
Okay.
So if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm probably making good decisions and not having as much. Now, ministry is a contact sport, and it's stressful.
Contact sport,
Okay?
yes.
But if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, that's where you lose your balance. That's where you lose the battle for your soul. That's where you lose the battle for your peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because I'm chasing these things that everybody else says needs to be done, and they don't really have impact on my ministry or my family life.
Well, and in my brain, the reason why I connected the first part of our discussion and this part of our discussion is because it seems like if I do that too long, I'm going to default back into these other states where I'm starting to feel burnout, and I'm starting to feel like maybe I'm not good at this, or maybe I'm hearing a bunch of criticisms, or maybe I'm a recovering people pleaser and I'm not doing the stuff they want me to do.
But if I've been doing the urgent and then I'm not studying.
Yes.
I'm not developing good research habits.
Yeah.
I'm only reading my Bible for sermon prep.
Right.
I'm not reading my Bible for Lonnie prep. And then it becomes a mixed message, and your audience begins to know when you're being disingenuous. Your audience can tell, hey, he's up there because he has to say something, not because he has something to say.
Yeah.
And once you start getting the feedback from your audience like that, you start questioning. Then the cognitive dissonance sets in.
Yeah.
Am I just fake? Am I hollow? Do I have imposter syndrome?
Right.
Which leads to depression.
Right.
And so stress, loss, and guilt create depression.
Okay.
And those can be real or perceived.
Okay. Yeah.
And then stress is conflict, pressure, or frustration. Now that's ministry.
Yeah.
Conflict, pressure, and then frustration. And all those can be connected to one or more of the cognitive distortions that we talk about.
Okay. There's several layers to all of this.
It's deep. and it's not something that you just glibly jump out and do.
Yeah.
And depending on your ability to be self-aware and be self-insightful, then you manage it. But if I don't know why I believe what I believe, but nobody walks around in my head.
Yeah.
So I think my view of the world is normal.
Yes.
People who can do math think everybody can do math.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah, please.
Okay? Yeah.
For the sake of the rest of us.
Yeah. And then, as a kid, I thought everybody could draw. I drew.
Yeah.
I'm a cartoonist. You come to my house, hey, what do you want? Let's draw. We don't draw. What are you, a communist? I couldn't believe that people couldn't draw. Well, just think about what family means to you, what dad means to you, what grief means to you. And until you realize, my view of the world is different, and wow, it may not be accurate. So here's the event. Here's what it means to me. What does it mean to me? What does it mean about me? Check that against reality. This person was unhappy with my sermon. It means I'm a bad preacher.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Right. No.
Did I have a bad sermon?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, maybe. It's possible. Yeah.
Maybe even likely, but
I'm a bad preacher. That's a different animal.
Right.
Is what I said true? Is it consistent with the gospel?
Right.
Then the way it was presented is what they're talking about, not the content.
Yes.
Now, if they come to you and the content's bad, that's a self-assessment.
Yeah.
Did I borrow somebody's outline? Did I look up my sermon on AI?
Yeah, right.
That kind of stuff. So then if it's true, you need to change it. But now sometimes people say things about us and they're not true.
Right.
And sometimes people say things about us and they're true, but they can't be changed.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people say things and they're true, they can be changed, but we've made a personal choice not to change them. Hey, you were unavailable Friday night at 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I turned my phone off because I had been up all night Thursday. I hadn't seen my kids. I hadn't slept in the bed with my wife. And
Right.
so I'm unwilling to change some of that. And then if you tell me something that's true and it's changeable, it needs to be changed, then you've told me something I needed to hear.
Right.
Put on your big boy pants and get over it, But a lot of guys, especially young preachers, when you're preaching student and when you're the intern, you hear nothing but praise.
Yes.
And the minute somebody starts writing you a check, they expect you to earn that check.
That's right.
And so we go from, oh, you're good, you're great, you're going to be good, to, hey, we need to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
And then it feels like the world crushes in on us.
Yes.
And understanding that everybody doesn't have to like my lesson for my lesson to be valid.
All of these things, I'm sitting here thinking, is it, I don't want to make a statement here that's discouraging. Is it, I'm questioning, is it even possible to like master all of this in my life? And I guess what I'm asking is this going to be a continual pursuit? This notion of checking in with myself, pursuing emotional, mentals. I mean, I know the answer to spiritual health. I mean, this is a process, right? I mean,
yeah, and you should have some people you trust.
Okay.
There should be somebody that's outside of the hierarchy of I'm accountable to.
Okay.
And just somebody I trust. I can say, hey, listen,
Yeah.
this is the way I handle this. What do you think?
Yeah.
And somebody that you trust well enough and know unconditionally that they love you well enough, they go, no, you didn't do that right. That would be dumb. I'd go apologize to my elders.
Okay.
Or I'd tell my wife, hey, look, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
In Mark Goldstein's book, Just Listen, he talks about having people that you can run things by so that you don't become a toxic person.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so if all I ever get is, oh, you're great, then the one person who's willing to tell me I'm not great is my enemy.
Yeah.
But if I have some friends go, that wasn't the best job you've ever done, I could tell you were tired.
Yeah.
I could tell you rushed through that. There's got to be somebody that you're not answerable to as far as job. Maybe another minister, maybe a close friend, somebody that is an equal. David and Jonathan held each other accountable.
Yeah.
We've sworn an oath of loyalty. I'm tired in the Lord.
Yeah.
And David tells Jonathan, if I'm worthy of treason, if I've done something wrong against the king of Israel, kill me yourself. You got anybody you trust well enough to go, here's the dagger, and you get to be the judge, jury, and executioner?
Use it if you need it. Wow.
You need somebody like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for this.
Man.
This is going to be one of these episodes we can re-listen to and just mine different nuggets, I think, as we go through. So I appreciate your thoughts.
David Burns.
Yes.
Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy.
Okay.
Will identify cognitive distortions. Probably a masterful work on cognitive behavioral therapy. Mark Goldstein's Just Listen. And then anything on emotion coaching.
Okay.
Either by John Gottman when he talks about marriages, or Dan Siegel when he talks about dealing with kids, called The Whole Brain Child. It's basically where I communicate with people in crisis. I try to use my intellect and they're in emotion. And so those are the good resources just to kind of read up on.
Okay.
And
good.
then, of course, the Emotional Intelligence book is pretty good. And remember, he means designed.
He means, yeah.
Robert, I appreciate your ministry. I appreciate what you do. I watch you from afar, and I hear good things. Well, and I'm so incredibly proud of Emily and the family you guys have. Thank you for letting me be on your podcast.
Thank you for coming on. And your podcast, Keeping Up with
Jones.
I wanted to say The Joneses, but that wouldn't
Jones.
have. Yeah, Keeping Up with
That's
Jones.
That's what my wife calls me. So it's just Jones, Keeping Up with Jones.
I love it.
And one of my friends is trying to get her to start one called Putting Up with Jones, the Jackie Jones podcast adventure. But we haven't got her behind the mic yet.
All right.
But yeah, it comes out every Tuesday. We're in the 5th season.
All fun.
And the manuscripts are going to be available, and we're going to publish each season as a book.
Oh, okay. That's
and so
fun.
You'll have the manuscript. If you want to use some of that as sermon illustrations or whatever, they'll be spelled out. Thanks again for letting me be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We want to thank you for being a part of this edition of Preachers in Training and remind you that you can find us every Thursday from thelightnetwork.tv and wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, let's preach the word.